Honestly, when I see all those police in Victoria, thousands of them arresting mothers, chasing away grandmothers just sitting in a park, or teenagers on a beach, or people chanting freedom at a market. I mean, really, wouldn't those police do so much more good if they were used instead to help track people who are infectious and to stay outside their homes to make sure they infect no one else? If they just did those basics, they wouldn't need to be set loose like an army, an occupying army against people just wanting freedom. That makes so much more sense, wouldn't it? Now, an example of one of the saddest and craziest bans that we've seen, it's not just in Queensland. This at a funeral, a huge church, plenty of room for social distancing, but under the government's rules, only 10 people could be there. And no one, none of the children there, of the man closest to the camera, could sit next to their dad, the grieving widower. That's David Ross, burying his wife Claire. Well, I was joined a short while ago by David Ross and son Danny. David and Danny Ross, thank you both so much for your time. Danny, can I start with you? Claire Ross, your mum, first tell me about her. What led to her death?
Well, I'll just start with saying that she was a pretty sociable lady. She was out all the time, but over the last 6 months with the coronavirus, and especially the second lockdown, she felt that she was trapped in her own home. She could only go out for an hour a day. And in the end, it got to her, Andrew.
David, my condolences on your terrible loss. Did you notice that Claire was struggling with these bans?
Yes, we handled it fairly well, Andrew. But you know, 2 weeks ago, there was little signs that, you know, if you're living with a person, you don't really pick them up quickly, and suddenly things dive down very quickly.
Now, after her death, that's hard enough to deal with, of course. Danny, then you just had to go through the funeral as well, with the bans on with social distancing and no more than 10 people there, which would have been tough given that there are 6 children, for instance. How did you decide who could actually go and who had to miss out?
Well, it was quite tough. I've got 5 brothers and sisters, so there was 6. That's made 6 of us, and then Dad 7. And Mum has 2 brothers and a sister, which made 10. So no grandchildren, no great-grandchildren, no aunties, no uncles, no friends. So it was tough, but I didn't think it'd be as tough as what it was once I was inside the church. I didn't realise how far apart we would have to be seated, and I just couldn't believe how far we were seating from Dad.
So there's your dad on this terrible day sitting by himself, and none of you were allowed to sit next to him.
Correct. So, and you know, during the service, I mean, I can't really remember much of the service. I was just sitting on my own in the service thinking to myself, this is just crazy. Like, there's my dad over there crying, and my sisters or myself couldn't go over there and comfort him in his time of need. It was ludicrous.
David, how did you feel about that? I mean, would you have been prepared to take what small, even infinitesimally small risk there was of catching the virus from one of your children, just to have them sit with you?
I think so, Andrew. You know, I'm pretty confident none of them had it. I know I didn't have it. And that was one of the problems with my wife. She thought right through that she had it. She got tested 4 times, all negative, but it played on her mental health, yes.
And how hard was it being on your own sitting there?
Well, Andrew, I felt isolated, like I was sitting in my home, I suppose, and we couldn't look at each other. There was no, just nothing really.
Danny, obviously the government thinks that these are rules to keep people safe. Is that how you see them?
In general, I believe in the masks and the, not living on top of each other. But when it comes to funerals, and it's, I mean, there was a trauma in the actual church itself. I was going through a trauma in the church while my mum in the service, thinking, I wasn't even thinking about the service. I was just thinking about how pathetic this was, and in an 800 square metre church, Andrew, it's you could have got 40 people into that church quite safely, and I know in the business that I'm in, we had 100 people in our warehouse. Well, we've had to cut that by 30%, so we've still got 70 people running around in a warehouse, and for our family's mental health and trauma through that, you can't tell me that there's any compassion from the government when it comes to funerals.
David, you mentioned that Claire, the fear had played on her mind quite a bit, and then the stay home, not being able to see friends, being trapped, particularly the second time. How do you feel about the fear that's been whipped up about the coronavirus?
Yes, well, there is quite a bit of that. People have got to deal with it somehow, and Australians are happy-go-lucky people. We like doing what we can. We're very outdoors people, so I think it's pretty tough on all of us. My wife was a stickler for the rules, and she took the rules seriously, and in lots of ways, that was detrimental to her mental state.
And how are you coping with the lockdown, given the limit that now puts on you being able to see people?
Andrew, I'm an optimist, and I'm a reader, and I can watch things TV. I was handling it quite well because I could entertain myself, if you like to say that, and I was prepared to see it out.
Well, all the best to you both, David and Danny. You've gone through a tough time. The government, in my view, should not have made the funeral even tougher for you. All the best to you both.
We agree. Thank you for your...
agree. Thank you for your time, Andrew.
Thanks, Andrew.
Danny told me after, they should have held the funeral at a supermarket. They could have got more than 10 people there, and the grandkids could have been there. You explain that.